We're going to talk about public key cryptography and message authentication. So in addition to message confidentiality, message authentication is an important network security function. And it's this chapter that examines three aspects of message authentication. First, we're going to look at the message authentication codes and hash functions to provide message authentication. Then we'll look at public key encryption principles and two specific public key algorithms. These algorithms are useful in the exchange of conventional encryption keys. Then we look at the use of public key encryption to produce digital signatures, and that provides an enhanced form of message authentication. Message authentication. Encryption protects against passive attacks, such as eavesdropping. A different requirement is to protect against active attacks. For example, falsification of data and transactions. Protection against such attacks is known as message authentication. A message, file, document, or other collection of data is said to be authentic when it is genuine and comes from its alleged source. Message authentication is a procedure that allows communicating parties to verify that received messages are authentic. The two important aspects are to verify the contents of the message have not been altered and that the source is authentic. We may also wish to verify a message's timeliness. It has not been artificially delayed or replayed, for example, and sequence relative to other messages flowing between the parties. All of these concerns come under the category of data integrity as described in Chapter 1. Approaches to message authentication. It would seem possible to perform authentication simply by the use of symmetric encryption. If we assume that only the sender and receiver share a key, which is as it should be, then only the genuine sender would be able to encrypt a message successfully for the other participant, provided the receiver can recognize a valid message. Furthermore, if the message includes an error detection code and a sequence number, the receiver is assured that no alterations have been made and that sequencing is proper. If the message also includes a timestamp, the receiver is assured that the message has not been delayed beyond that normally expected for network transit. In fact, symmetric encryption alone is not a suitable tool for data authentication. To give one simple example, in the ECB mode of encryption, if an attacker reorders the blocks of ciphertext, then each block will still decrypt successfully. However, the reordering may alter the meaning of the overall data sequence. Although sequence numbers may be used at some level, for example, each IP packet, it is typically not the case that a separate sequence number will be associated with each B block of plaintext. Thus, block reordering is a threat. In this section, we examine several approaches to message authentication that do not rely on encryption. In all of these approaches, an authentication tag is generated and appended to each message for transmission. The message itself is not encrypted and can be read at the destination independent of the authentication function at the destination. Because the approaches discussed in this section do not encrypt the message, message confidentiality is not provided. As was mentioned, message encryption by itself does not provide a secure form of authentication. However, it is possible to combine authentication and confidentiality in a single algorithm by encrypting a message plus its authentication tag. Typically, however, message authentication is provided as a separate function from message encryption. There is a place for both authentication and encryption in meeting security requirements. Please review the message authentication figure. One authentication technique involves the use of a secret key to generate a small block of data, known as a message authentication code, MAC, and then it's appended to the message. This technique assumes that two communicating parties, say A and B, share a common secret key, KAB. When A has a message to send to B, it calculates the message authentication code as a function of the message and the key. The message plus code are transmitted to the intended recipient. The recipient performs the same calculation on the received message using the same secret key to generate a new message authentication code. The received code is compared to the calculated code, as in the figure. If we assume that only the receiver and sender know the identity of the secret key, and if the received code matches the calculated code, then the following statements apply. 1. The receiver is assured that the message has not been altered. If an attacker alters the message but does not alter the code, then the receiver's calculation of the code will differ from the received code. Because the attacker is assumed not to know the secret key, the attacker cannot alter the code to correspond to the alterations in the message. The receiver is assured that the message is from the alleged sender. Because no one else knows the secret key, no one else could prepare a message with the proper code. Further, if the message includes a sequence number, such as is used with HDLC and TCP, then the receiver can be assured of the proper sequence, because an attacker cannot successfully alter the sequence number. A number of algorithms could be used to generate the code. The NIST specification, FIPS Pub 113, recommends the use of DES. DES is used to generate an encrypted version of the message, and the last number of bits of ciphertext are used as the code. And a 16 or 32-bit code is typical. The process just described is similar to encryption. One difference is that the authentication algorithm need not be reversible, as it must for decryption, because of the mathematical properties of the authentication function. It is less vulnerable to being broken than encryption. One-way hash functions. An alternative to the message authentication code is the one-way hash function. As with the message authentication code, a hash function accepts a variable size message M as input and produces a fixed size message digest as output. Unlike the MAC, a hash function does not take a secret key as input. To authenticate a message, the message digest is sent with the message in such a way that the message digest is authentic. Please review the message authentication figure. The figure illustrates three ways in which the message can be authenticated. The message digest can be encrypted using conventional encryption. If it is assumed that only the sender and receiver share the encryption key, then authenticity is assured. The message digest can be encrypted using public key encryption, shown in Part B, and this is explained in Section 3.5. The public key approach has two advantages. It provides a digital signature as well as message authentication. It does not require the distribution of keys to communicating parties. These two approaches also have an advantage over approaches that encrypt the entire message in that less computation is required. Nevertheless, there has been interest in developing a technique that avoids encryption altogether. The figure D 3.2c shows a technique that uses a hash function but no encryption for message authentication. Because the secret value itself is not sent, it is not possible for an attacker to modify an intercepted message. As long as the secret value remains secret, it is also not possible for an attacker to generate a false message. A variation on the third technique, called HMAC, is the one adopted for IP security, IPsec. That's described in Chapter 9. It also has been specified for SNMP version 3, shown in Chapter 13. Secure hash functions. The purpose of a hash function is to produce a fingerprint of a file, message, or other block of data. To be useful for message authentication, a hash function H must have the following properties. 1. H can be applied to a block of data of any size. 2. H produces a fixed length output. 3. It is relatively easy to compute for any given input, making both hardware and software implementations practical. 4. For any given code H, it is computationally infeasible to find X such that H of X equals H. A hash function with this property is referred to as one-way or pre-image resistant. 5. For any given block X, it is computationally infeasible to find Y, X with H of Y equals H of X. A hash function with this property is referred to as second pre-image resistant. This is sometimes referred to as weak collision resistant. 6. It is computationally infeasible to find any pair X of Y such that H on X equals H on Y. A hash function with this property is referred to as collision resistant. This is sometimes referred to as strong collision resistant. A hash function that satisfies the first 5 properties in the preceding list is referred to as a weak hash function. If the 6th property is also satisfied, then it is referred to as a strong hash function. The 6th property, collision resistant, protects against a sophisticated class of attack known as the birthday attack. Security of hash functions. As with symmetric encryption, there are 2 approaches to attacking a secure hash function: cryptanalysis and brute force attack. As with symmetric encryption algorithms, cryptanalysis of a hash function involves exploiting logical weaknesses in the algorithm. The strength of a hash function against brute force attacks depends solely on the length of the hash code produced by the algorithm. If collision resistance is required, and this is desirable for a general purpose secure hash code, then the value 2 to the n divided by 2 determines the strength of the hash code against brute force attacks. Several people have presented a design for a $10 million collision search machine for MD5, which has a 128-bit hash length that could find a collision in 24 days. Thus, a 128-bit code may be viewed as inadequate. The next step up, if the hash code is treated as a sequence of 32 bits, is a 160-bit hash length. With this hash length, the same search machine would require over 4,000 years to find a collision. With today's technology, the time would be much shorter, so that 160 bits now appears suspect to be broken. Simple hash figure. All hash functions operate using the following general principles. The input message is viewed as a sequence of n-bit blocks. The input is then processed 1 block at a time in an iterative fashion to produce an n-bit hash function. One of the simplest hash functions is the bit-by-bit exclusive OR of every block. And in the figure, it illustrates this operation. It produces a simple parity for each bit position and is known as a longitudinal redundancy check. The SHA secure hash function. In recent years, the most widely used hash function has been the secure hash algorithm, SHA. Indeed, because virtually every other widely used hash function had been found to have substantial cryptanalytic weaknesses, SHA was, more or less, the last remaining standardized hash algorithm by about 2005. SHA was developed by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, and it was published as a Federal Information Processing Standard, FIPS 180, and that was done in 1993. When weaknesses were discovered in SHA, now known as SHA-0, a revised version was issued as FIPS 180-1 and is referred to as SHA-1. The actual standards document is entitled Secure Hash Standard. SHA is based on the hash function MD4, and its design closely models MD4. SHA-1 produces a hash value of 160 bits. And in 2005, NIST announced the intention to phase out approval of SHA-1 and move to a reliance on SHA-2 by 2010. Please review the table, comparison of SHA parameters. In 2002, NIST produced a revised version of the standard, FIPS 180-2, that defined three new versions of SHA with hash value lengths of 256, 384, and 512 bits, known as SHA 256 SHA, 384 SHA, 512. Collectively, these hash algorithms are known as SHA-2. These new versions have the same underlying structure and use the same types of modular arithmetic and logical binary operations as SHA-1. A revised document was issued as FIP Pub 180-3, which added a 224-bit version. SHA-1 and SHA-2 are also specified in RFC 6234, which essentially duplicates the material in FIPS 180-3, but adds a C code implementation. Please review the message digest figure. The algorithm takes as input a message with a maximum length of less than 2 to the 128 bits and produces as output a 512-bit message digest. The input is processed in 1024-bit blocks, and the figure depicts the overall processing of a message to produce a digest. Please review the SHA-512 figure. The heart of the algorithm is a module that consists of 80 rounds. This module is labeled in the figure as F. The logic is illustrated in the figure. SHA-3. SHA-2, particularly the 512-bit version, would appear to provide unassailable security. However, SHA-2 shares the same structure and mathematical operations as its predecessors, and this is a cause for concern. Because it would take years to find a suitable replacement for SHA-2, should it become vulnerable, NIST announced in 2007 a competition to provide the next generation NIST hash function, which is to be called SHA-3. Following are basic requirements that must be satisfied by any candidate for SHA-3. It must be possible to replace SHA-2 with SHA-3 in any application by a simple drop-in substitution. Therefore, SHA-3 must support hash value lengths of 224, 256, 384, and 512 bits. SHA-3 must provide the preservation of the online nature of SHA-2. That is, the algorithm must process comparatively small blocks, 512 or maybe 1024 bits, at a time instead of requiring that the entire message be buffered in memory before processing it. In 2012, NIST selected a winning submission and formally published SHA-3. A detailed presentation of SHA-3 is provided in Chapter 15. HMAC. In recent years, there has been increased interest in developing a MAC derived from a cryptographic hash code such as SHA-1. The motivations for this interest are as follows. Cryptographic hash functions generally execute faster in software than conventional encryption algorithms such as DES. Library code for cryptographic hash functions is widely available. A hash function such as SHA-1 was not designed for the use of a MAC and cannot be used directly for that purpose because it does not rely on a secret key. There have been a number of proposals for the incorporation of a secret key into an existing hash algorithm. The approach that has received the most support is HMAC. HMAC has been issued as RFC 2104 and has been chosen as the mandatory to implement MAC for IP security, IPsec, and is used in other internet protocols such as Transport Layer Security, TLS, and Secure Electronic Transaction, SET. HMAC design objectives. RFC 2104 lists the following design objectives for HMAC. To use, without modifications, available hash functions, in particular hash functions that perform well in software and for which code is freely and widely available. To allow for easy replaceability of the embedded hash function in case faster or more secure hash functions are found or required. To preserve the original performance of the hash function without incurring a significant degradation. To use and handle keys in a simple way. To have a well understood cryptographic analysis of the strength of the authentication mechanism based on reasonable assumptions on the embedded hash function. The first two objectives are important to the acceptability of HMAC. HMAC treats the hash function as a black box. This has two benefits. First, an existing implementation of a hash function can be used as a module in implementing HMAC. In this way, the bulk of the HMAC code is pre-packaged and ready to use without modification. Second, if it is ever desired to replace a given hash function in an HMAC implementation, all that is required is to remove the existing hash function module and drop in the new module. This could be done if a faster hash function was desired. More importantly, if the security of the embedded hash function were compromised, the security of HMAC could be retained simply by replacing the embedded hash function with a more secure one. The last design objective in the preceding list is, in fact, the main advantage of HMAC over other proposed hash-based schemes. HMAC can be proven secure provided that the embedded hash function has some reasonable cryptographic strengths. We return to this point later in the section, but first we examine the structure of the HMAC. Please pause and review the figure with the HMAC structure. Please review the CIPHER-based message authentication code. The CIPHER-based message authentication code mode of operation is for use with AES and SSS. It is specified in the NIST Special Publication 800-38B. Counter with cipher block chaining message authentication code. The counter with cipher block chaining message authentication code CCM mode of operation, defined in NIST SP 800-38C, is referred to as an authenticated encryption mode. Authenticated encryption is a term used to describe encryption systems that simultaneously protect confidentiality and authenticity, i.e. integrity, of communications. Many applications and protocols require both forms of security, but until recently, the two services have been designed separately. The key algorithmic ingredients of CCM are that the AES encryption algorithm and the CTR mode of operation use the HMAC authentication algorithm. A single key is used for both encryption and MAC algorithms. Please review the figure with counter with cipher block chaining message authentication code. The figure illustrates the operation of CCM. For authentication, the input includes the nonce, the associated data, and the plaintext. This input is then formatted as a sequence of blocks B0 through BR. The first block contains the nonce plus some formatting bits that indicate the lengths of the N, A, and P elements. This is followed by 0 or more blocks that contain A, followed by 0 or more blocks that contain P. The resulting sequence of blocks serves as input to the CMAC algorithm, which produces a MAC value with length TLEN, which is less than or equal to the block length, as shown in the figure. For encryption, a sequence of counters is generated that must be independent of the nonce. The authentication tag is encrypted in CTR mode using the single counter CTR0. The TLEN most significant bits of the output are XORed with the tag to produce an encrypted tag. The remaining counters are used for the CTR mode encryption of the plaintext. The encrypted plaintext is concatenated with the encrypted tag to form the ciphertext output. Public key encryption structure. Public key encryption, first publicly proposed by DIFFIE-HELLMAN in 1976, is the first truly revolutionary advance in encryption in literally thousands of years. Public key encryption is based on mathematical functions rather than on simple operations on bit patterns, such as used in symmetric encryption algorithms. More important, public key cryptography is asymmetric, involving the use of two separate keys, in contrast to the symmetric conventional encryption, which uses only one key. The use of two keys has profound consequences in the areas of confidentiality, key distribution, and authentication. Before proceeding, we should first mention several common misconceptions concerning public key encryption. One is that public key encryption is more secure from cryptanalysis than conventional encryption. In fact, the security of any encryption scheme depends on 1, the length of the key, and 2, the computational work involved in breaking a cipher. There is nothing in principle about either conventional or public key encryption that makes one superior to the other from the point of view of resisting cryptanalysis. A second misconception is that public key encryption is a general purpose technique that has made conventional encryption obsolete. On the contrary, because of the computational overhead of current public key encryption schemes, there seems no foreseeable likelihood that conventional encryption will be abandoned. Finally, there is a feeling that key distribution is trivial when using public key encryption compared to the rather cumbersome handshaking involved with key distribution centers for conventional encryption. In fact, some form of the protocol is needed, often involving a central agent, and the procedures involved are no simpler or more efficient than those required for conventional encryption. Please pause and see the public key cryptography figure. A public key encryption scheme has 6 ingredients. Plain text. This is the readable message or data that is fed into the algorithm as input. Encryption algorithm. The encryption algorithm performs various transformations on the plain text. Public and private key. This is a pair of keys that has been selected so that if one is used for encryption, the other is used for decryption. The exact transformations performed by the encryption algorithm depend on the public or private key that is provided as input. Ciphertext. This is the scrambled message produced as output. It depends on the plain text and the key. For a given message, 2 different keys will produce 2 different ciphertexts. Decryption algorithm. This algorithm accepts the ciphertext and the matching key and produces the original plain text. As the name suggests, the public key of the pair is made public for others to use, while the private key is known only to its owner. A general-purpose public key cryptographic algorithm relies on one key for encryption and a different but related key for decryption. The key used in conventional encryption is typically referred to as a secret key. The 2 keys used for public key encryption are referred to as the public key and the private key. Invariably, the private key is kept secret, but it is referred to as a private key rather than a secret key to avoid confusion with conventional encryption. Applications for public key cryptosystems. Before proceeding, we need to clarify one aspect of public key cryptosystems that is otherwise likely to lead to confusion. Public key systems are characterized by the use of a cryptographic type of algorithm with 2 keys, one held private and one available publicly. Depending upon the application, the sender uses either the sender's private key, the receiver's public key, or both to perform some type of cryptographic function. In broad terms, we can classify the use of public key cryptosystems into 3 categories. Encryption-decryption. The sender encrypts a message with the recipient's public key. Digital signature. The sender signs a message with its private key. Signing is achieved by a cryptographic algorithm applied to the message or to a small block of data that is a function of the message. Key exchange. 2 sides cooperate to exchange a session key. Several different approaches are possible involving the private keys of one or both parties. Please refer to the table, Applications for Public Key Cryptosystems. Some algorithms are suitable for all 3 applications, whereas others can be used only for 1 or 2 of these applications. The table indicates the applications supported by the algorithms discussed in this chapter, RSA and Diffie-Hellman. This table also includes the Digital Signature Standard, DSS, and elliptic-curve cryptography, also mentioned in the chapter. One general observation can be made at this point. Public key algorithms require considerably more computation than symmetric algorithms for comparable security and a comparable plain text length. Accordingly, public key algorithms are used only for short messages or data blocks, such as to encrypt a secret key or PIN. Please pause and refer to the figure, the RSA algorithm. The two most widely used public key algorithms are RSA and Diffie-Hellman. We look at both of these in this section and then briefly introduce two other algorithms. One of the first public key schemes was developed in 1977 and first published in 1978. The RSA scheme has since that time been the supreme and mostly widely accepted and implemented approach to public key encryption. RSA is a block cipher in which the plain text and ciphertext are considered as integers between 0 and n-1 for some n. And the figure summarizes the RSA algorithm. Please pause and review the figure, example of RSA algorithm. And this is an example of how the RSA algorithm is implemented. Security considerations. The security of RSA depends on it being used in such a way as to counter potential attacks. 4 possible attack approaches are as follows. Mathematical attacks. There are several approaches, all equivalent in an effort to factoring the product of 2 primes. The defense against mathematical attacks is to use a large key size. Thus, the larger the number of bits in D, the better. However, because the calculations involved, both in key generation and in encryption-decryption, are complex, the larger the size of the key, the slower the system will run. Transitioning the use of cryptographic algorithms and key lengths recommends the use of a 2048-bit key size. A recent report from the European Union Agency for Network and Information Security have determined that either of these 2 lengths should provide adequate security for considerable time in the future. There's also timing attacks, and these depend on the running time of the decryption algorithm. Various approaches to mask the time required so as to thwart attempts to deduce key size have been suggested, such as introducing a random delay. There's also chosen ciphertext attacks. This type of attack exploits properties of the RSA algorithm by selecting blocks of data that, when processed using the target's private key, yield information needed for cryptanalysis. These attacks can be thwarted by suitable padding of the plaintext. To counter sophisticated chosen ciphertext attacks, RSA Security, a leading RSA vendor and former holder of the patent, recommends modifying the plaintext using a procedure known as optimal asymmetric encryption padding. A full discussion of the threats are beyond our scope, but for an introduction, please refer to the end of chapter information. Here we simply summarize the OAEP procedure as shown in this slide. Please pause the video and review the encryption using optimal asymmetric encryption padding in the figure. Diffie-Hellman key exchange. The first published public key algorithm appeared in the seminal paper by Diffie and Hellman that defined public key cryptography and is generally referred to as the Diffie-Hellman key exchange. A number of commercial products employ this key exchange technique. The purpose of the algorithm is to enable 2 users to exchange a secret key securely that can be used for subsequent encryption of messages. The algorithm itself is limited to the exchange of the keys. The Diffie-Hellman algorithm depends for its effectiveness on the difficulty of computing discrete logarithms. Please pause the video and review this figure of the Diffie-Hellman key exchange. And this is a summary. One issue with the previous slide is that it is insecure against a man-in-the-middle attack. Suppose Alice and Bob wish to exchange keys and Darth is the adversary. The attack proceeds as follows, as shown in this figure. The key exchange protocol is vulnerable to such an attack because it does not authenticate the participants. This vulnerability can be overcome with the use of digital signatures and public key certificates. And these topics are explored later in this chapter and in chapter 4. Digital Signature Standard, DSS. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, has published Federal Information Processing Standard, FIPS, Pub 186, known as the Digital Signature Standard, DSS. The DSS makes use of the SHA-1 and presents a new digital signature technique, the Digital Signature Algorithm, DSA. The DSS was originally proposed in 1991 and revised in 1993 in response to public feedback concerning the security of the scheme. There was a further minor revision in 1996. The DSS uses an algorithm that is designed to provide only the digital signature function. Unlike RSA, it cannot be used for encryption or key exchange. Digital signatures. NIST FIPS Pub 186-4, which is Digital Signature Standard DSS, defines a digital signature as follows: the result of a cryptographic transformation of data that, when properly implemented, provides a mechanism for verifying origin authentication, data integrity, and signatory non-repudiation. Thus, a digital signature is a data-dependent bit pattern generated by an agent as a function of a file, message, or other form of data block. Another agent can access the data block and its associated signature and verify that 1, the data block has been signed by the alleged signer, and that 2, the data block has not been altered since the signing. Further, the signer cannot repudiate the signature. FIPS 186-4 specifies the use of one of 3 digital signature algorithms. Digital Signature Algorithm, DSA, the original NIST-approved algorithm, which is based on the difficulty of computing discrete logarithms. RSA Digital Signature Algorithm, based on the RSA public key algorithm. Elliptic-curve digital signature algorithm, based on elliptic-curve cryptography. In this section, we provide a brief overview of the digital signature process, then describe the RSA digital signature algorithm. Elliptic-curve cryptography, ECC. The vast majority of the products and standards that use public key cryptography for encryption and digital signatures use RSA. The bit length for secure RSA has increased over recent years, and this has put a heavier processing load on applications that use RSA. This burden has ramifications, especially for electronic commerce sites that conduct large numbers of secure transactions. Recently, a competing system has begun to challenge RSA, which is elliptic curve cryptography, ECC. Already, ECC is showing up in standardization efforts, including the IEEE P1363 standard for public key cryptography. The principal attraction of ECC compared to RSA is that it appears to offer equal security for a far smaller bit size, thereby reducing processing overhead. On the other hand, although the theory of ECC has been around for some time, it is only recently that products have begun to appear and that there has been sustained cryptanalytic interest in probing for weaknesses. Thus, the confidence level in ECC is not yet as high as that in RSA. ECC is fundamentally more difficult to explain than either RSA or Diffie-Hellman, and a full mathematical description is beyond the scope of this book. The technique is based on the use of a mathematical construct known as the elliptic curve. Please pause and review the figure, simplified depiction of essential elements of digital signature process. The figure is a generic model of the process of making and using digital signatures. All of the digital signature schemes in FIPS 186-4 have this structure. Suppose that Bob wants to send a message to Alice. Although it is not important that the message be kept a secret, he wants Alice to be certain that the message is indeed from him. For this purpose, Bob uses a secure hash function, such as SHA-512, to generate a hash value for the message. That hash value, together with Bob's private key, serve as input to a digital signature generation algorithm that produces a short block function that acts as a digital signature. Bob sends the message with the signature attached. When Alice receives the message plus the signature, she 1. Calculates a hash value for the message, and 2. Provides the hash value and Bob's public key as input to a digital signature verification algorithm. If the algorithm returns the result that the signature is valid, Alice is assured that the message must have been signed by Bob. No one else has Bob's private key, and therefore no one else could have created a signature that could be verified for this message with Bob's public key. In addition, it is impossible to alter the message without access to Bob's private key. So the message is authenticated both in terms of source and in terms of data integrity. It is important to emphasize that the encryption process just described does not provide confidentiality. That is, the message being sent is safe from alteration, but not safe from eavesdropping. This is obvious in the case of a signature based on a portion of the message, because the rest of the message is transmitted in the clear. Even in the case of complete encryption, there is no protection of confidentiality because any observer can decrypt the message by using the sender's public key. Please pause and review the figure, RSA-PSS encoding and signature generation. The essence of the RSA digital signature algorithm is to encrypt the hash of the message to be signed using RSA. However, as with the use of RSA for encryption of keys or short messages, the RSA digital signature algorithm first modifies the hash value to increase security. There are several approaches to this, one of which is the RSA probabilistic signature scheme, RSA-PSS. And this is the latest of the RSA schemes and the one that RSA Laboratories recommends as the most secure of the RSA digital signature schemes. We provide a brief overview here. The figure illustrates the RSS-PSS signature generation process. The objective with this algorithm is to make it more difficult for an adversary to find another message that maps to the same message digest as a given message, or to find two messages that map to the same message digest. Because the salt changes with every use, signing the same message twice using the same private key will yield two different signatures. This is an added measure of security. So in summary, we have a variety of approaches to message authentication. We've talked about the secure hash functions. We went on to talk about the digital signatures, message authentication codes, the principles of public key cryptography, and then we went into a little bit of detail on the algorithms. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.